Thank you very much, Steve, and as always, very warm, overstated, and I can't wait to hear what I've got to say as a result of that, as they say. But good afternoon, if I may say, first of all, to my fellow speakers, Jane and Hugh, to the moderators who are going to be handling the questions, to the sponsors, of course, especially City of Casey, thank you, Sam, and good afternoon to you all, trustees and guests today. Now, I've only got 10 minutes, so I've got to move fairly quickly through what will be 4 very simple parts of what I want to share with you. First of all, where are the jobs in Australia right now? So we know where we're starting from when we go forward to look at Australia's future workforce. Secondly, are we creating enough jobs and where are they likely to be? Thirdly, what is going to lead to the creation of those jobs, what do we need to do? And finally, perhaps as an adjunct, ask the question, do we need a new industrial relations regime to go forward at the pace we need to go to fulfil full employment and other aspirations of the workforce? First of all, where are the jobs right now? Well, as at the last count in March this year, which is only a couple of months ago, we had 11.7 million employed Australians and perhaps just over 500,000 unemployed, because we have an unemployment level of 6%, as we know. Those colours represent what we call the primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary and quinary industries in the economy of Australia, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. Incidentally, that piegram is almost identical to Canada, very, very similar to most countries in Europe and the United States as well. So we're not alone with a shape like that. The primary sector is quite small when it comes to jobs, as you can see there, way less than 5%, and yet there was a period in Australia's history when they were well over 50%, of course, but you'd have to go back to the 19th century to find that. But the primary industries are, of course, agriculture and mining, not very big employers, very, very capital intensive, and both quite capable of extraordinary productivity gains. The next sector, the secondary sector, of course, is the value-adding of things that come from the soil. That means manufacturing, construction, of course, using materials, and, of course, our utilities like electricity, gas and water. We then have a yellow section, which is called the tertiary sector, which could otherwise be called commerce, consisting of the distribution of goods, and that's, of course, wholesaling, retailing and transport. Then we have the massive and the biggest single employing sector of the economy, the quaternary sector, and that's made up of all those industries that either have information or finance as an integral part of what they do, including education, which of course is Jane's area, which she'll be talking about later on. And the fifth area, or the quinary, is of course the personal and other services more recently outsourced, like hospitality or health, where of course health was mostly done in the home by mum, is now mostly done out of the home because that's one of the many things we've been outsourcing. So that's where the jobs are today. But are we creating more jobs than we're losing? And if you were to read most of the media these days, you could be led into believing that we are not creating as many jobs as we are losing, and we're going to hell in a handbasket. Well, it ain't so. Whenever we hear the wailing of the loss of jobs in the automotive section, Alcoa, all the others that have been written up over the last 12 months, we create that many jobs that are lost in approximately 4 to 5 weeks every year. So in a sense, the media is not doing us any favour. The facts are that over the last 5 years to March this year, we have created almost 6 times more jobs than we've lost. So to the doomsayers, I'd say, please stop doing that. You're trying to scare the public for no necessary reason at all. What you can see, though, on that chart, of the jobs we're creating, they're almost all service industry jobs, and that's true right across the world. It's not peculiar to Australia. Mining was a growth area in those 5 years, but as we'll see, looking forward over the next 5 years in just a moment, mining will be one of the losers because it's forced to shed labour in favour of even more productivity gains to compete with prices of ores that have fallen by half, if not more than that in some cases. The jobs are lost, not hard to predict that. Yes, we have been losing them out of manufacturing. We're losing them out of agriculture as it becomes more capital intensive and efficient. We've lost some out of wholesale trade, although they will be recovered. And we have lost some out of administrative and support services. These things like personnel services, and many other related services that have been outsourced by corporations more recently. Over the next 5 years to the year 2019, you can see, I think, even less jobs will appear in what you might call the secondary sector. Utilities a bit, yes, construction a bit, but you can see just what sort of a society we're going into when you look at the new jobs being created. They're virtually all in the quaternary and quinary sector. The ones we're losing, again, more than half the ones we're losing will be out of manufacturing, some out of agriculture, and certainly some out of mining as they compete to be competitive in the world against very, very low ore prices. How and where are jobs created? Now, I think this is maybe just the most important thing I will talk about, because I'm not sure we ever in our daily lives think about where jobs actually come from. But it's always been a very simple source, and this will be on my gravestone because many of you have heard me talk about outsourcing. But outsourcing is what creates most industries. Now, today we've got 509 industry classes in the Australian economy, ranging from growing wheat through universities, through making whatever, through finance and right up to the end. So we've got 509 industries. Almost all of those have been created over the last 200 years by outsourcing, either by the outsourcing of things to create the agricultural industry, forgetting, as we often do, that agriculture began in the backyard of homes. In the early days of the colony, we grew our own food. If we had continued to grow our own food, we would never have had an agricultural industry. In the industrial age, which lasted from the 1860s to the 1960s, that 100-year period, we outsourced the making and building of things. In other words, we stopped building our own homes. We stopped making things at home like clothes, like furniture, like preserving food, which we all did back in the early 1800s. We had to give that up to create the manufacturing industry. And right now, in the last, since 1965, when the new age began, what I call the infotronics age of services, we're giving up services from the home. And if we didn't do that, we'd be committing a mortal sin, because the only way you're going to create jobs in the future is to give up things you're doing in the home. Well, that's one of the main ways of doing it. And we tend to forget that's what we've been doing. Last year was an interesting year, 2014, because it was the first year in our history when the average amount of money spent by a family on outsourcing services exceeded the total amount of money we spent at the retail scene. First time ever in history. So outsourcing is certainly alive and well. This is the sort of outsourcing I'm talking about. There's outsourcing by households, there's outsourcing by businesses, there's outsourcing from overseas countries to us to supply them things, and there are also new jobs created by what we call new enabling utilities and technologies. And of course, the old technologies have ranged from things like transport, way back in the 1800s for the agrarian age, to electricity during the industrial age, through to now, of course, communications and all sorts of things that Hugh Bradlow is going to be talking about, coming as he does from Telstra. So clearly, utilities are critical. They're not very big. In case we think that the world's made up of technology in the future, it's not. If we take the old utility, which is still with us, called electricity, gas and water, it only occupies about 2.3% of the Australian economy. All the electricity, gas and water suppliers, 2.3%. If you take the whole of the ICT industry today, including the emergence of broadband, it's only 3% of the Australian economy. So utilities of this sort and the new age utility, including the digital disruption which we're now being forced to live with, is not very big. The role of these utilities is not so much to employ people as much as it is to be the role of a ubiquitous and facilitating and leveraging facility for all the other industries. And it's used, of course, both by business and in households, as we know. Household outsourcing, just to give you an idea of the sort of things we've been outsourcing in this chart, and of course you'll have the document in front of you, so I don't want to belabor this point any further, but it is a very, very big market today. And in 2014 it was $315 billion, it's getting close to $350 billion now. The average home is spending well over $36,000 this year on outsourcing services that we used to do in the home. So it's been an astonishing creator of jobs, well over 2 million, of course, and still growing. We've only outsourced about 1/3 of the services we do inside the home today. So there's 2/3 still to go. So we're going to have no shortage of jobs for the next 50 years just from outsourcing from the home alone. When it comes to business outsourcing, that is also very, very significant. It doesn't necessarily create a lot of net new jobs because the jobs might have been done inside a company, now they're being done outside the company. And one of our moderators, Steve Taylor, who's from Program Maintenance, and one of our sponsors today, thank you, Steve, would know what I mean by that, because a lot of those facilities of looking after a building were done inside the company, now they're being outsourced. And if we look at some of the sort of outsourcing the businesses have been doing and continue to do, and that's by no means finished yet, facilities management alone, which is Steve's area, would have a huge amount of growth still left of it over the next 10 or 20, 30 years. And then finally, we've got the overseas outsourcing jobs. In other words, by overseas countries outsourcing their needs to us. We traditionally think of agricultural minerals, and they're a huge part of our current exports, as we know. But the fastest growing and the outsourcing will be our biggest single source of exports within 15 years or less will be tourism. Tourism will easily outdistance the total exports of mining today within 10 to 15 years. We've only got to think about the fact that the biggest single travelling nation today is China, which is in our own time zone and in our own sector. And it's getting close to 90 million tourists a year leaving China. If we got 10% of those, which is not asking much because we've currently only got 1% of those tourists, if we had 10% of it, it would almost double the total tourism receipts we've got today and lift it from, say, 50 billion to 100 billion. So you can see how quickly we're going to overtake mining within the next 10 to 15 years, with yet again another service industry being at the forefront. Very quick word on the utilities, which are important throughout the ages. The only age I think had no ubiquitous utility was the hunting age. The agrarian age certainly had transport. The industrial age had, of course, power, both steam, water and ultimately electricity. The Intratronics age, the current age since 1965, has certainly got the ICT as the leading push. Hugh's going to be talking more about the second stage of ICT, which is involving things like cloud, cognitive software, and all the sorts of things that could scare us to death, but will probably make life a great deal easier and the economy far more efficient. Fastest growing industry themes, if we want to look at over the next 50 years, then it's certainly going to be not necessarily in any great order, but ICT and fast broadband. I am worried about fast broadband. We're not even in the top 30 nations anymore, and that's a real worry. It's probably the most important utility for the next 50 to 100 years, and we don't have any here in Australia worth spitting at. Knowledge industries, of course, are fast growing. Mine's one of those. Business services, as I mentioned already, financial services, and on we go, all the way down. That's the exciting new industries which are going to create the jobs right through for pretty well the rest of this century. And we're going to finish on just one final slide, which I think is important, and that is the workforce itself needs to be freer than it is, and it needs to escape, if I can call it, the shackles of the industrial age type thinking. The industrial age thinking, of course, was you got paid by inputs, not outputs. In other words, you turned up at 9, left at 5:30 and got paid X amount of dollars regardless of whether you did anything during the day or not. That's ridiculous in this day and age. Being paid by outputs is the way the world is starting to move. Whether you're a part-time worker, full-time worker, casual or a contractor, it doesn't much matter. Being paid by outputs is number one. The second thing is, I think the term employee is going to disappear between now and the middle of this century. I think employee is probably carrying the last vestige of the word slave in it. The only difference is you're allowed to go home at night, which is a big improvement. But other than that, the term employee is still carrying the last vestige of slavery in that term, and that's not the way the Gen Ys want to think. They're more free-ranging individuals. So I think that, if I can just finish, and I'm not going to go through this slide, I'll be using too much time, but there can be no bondage by businesses, bosses or unions in the future. That's got to be gone. The gradual demise of the concept of the employee, as I've already said. The rise of contractual relationships, which I think had a lid put on it, as we know, over the last 5 or 6 years. I find that a shame, because I think really by the middle of this century, most workers, bearing in mind all the baby boomers will have well and truly retired, let alone my age group, we'd be pushing up daisies. The younger age groups want to be free agents. They probably want to be treated as businesses in their own right. In other words, they're a business contracting with another business to provide goods or services at an agreed price and whatever it's going to be. People say, oh, but what about the poor old workers? Well, they're going to get advisors and mentors, don't worry. It's a bit like financial advice these days. That's why you use a financial advisor. And if you want to plan your career, you may well be using a career advisor to know where the best jobs are, how to sign a contract so you get a fair deal and all the rest of it. I think we have to go through at least a minor, if not major, revolution in the workforce, and that means the thinking really of both government, employers, are going to have to change quite radically, because we've got already a lot of catching up to do with where the Gen Y minds are, or the next generation as we often call them as well. People see them as a fairly troublesome group, the under-32s. They're only troublesome because I think that they think very differently to the older guard here in Australia. I find them a very, very exciting group. I don't know how to employ them for more than 3 years before they get bored witless. I haven't figured that out yet. What I do know is if you can get them on the right wavelength, they'll produce twice as much in a day as any other generation I've ever had working for me over the last 40 years. They're an extraordinary group, but they want to be free. And so I think freedom is one of those solutions to creating enough jobs for the future. Thank you for listening.